First time I got into trouble, I think I was about 6, and I've been a petty criminal, so to speak, for many years. Motorbikes, violence, drugs, there's all my youth, all my young adulthood was all spent in jail. So an ex-drug addict that I knew, he'd gone to rehab and he'd found a better way of life. His lifestyle had changed, of course, but there was something different about them. So when I heard from him that he can do it, I want that. Yeah. You know, I want that. I want to be able to have that. I went to NA from Spring Hill. That weekend, I was at Spring Hill, and one of the guys come over and we're yakking away. I said, "So, what happens today?" He goes, "Oh, you got to clean up." I said, "What do you mean clean up?" He goes, "Oh, you do the dusting and all that sort of stuff." I said, "Dusting?" He goes, "Yeah, mow the lawns." I said, "You got to be joking. What are you doing?" He goes, "I'm going to church." They were going to Sally's. So, okay. "Do you want to come?" I went, "Yep." So that was my way of getting out of doing chores, working. So I ended up going to church, and it's when I walked in, and they didn't want nothing. I thought, man, I like this. Hey, I want some of this. How do I get some of this? So I just keep coming back. Each week I went a little bit more and a little bit more, and I got to know a few more people who didn't want what I had. They didn't want to know what I'd done. They didn't want to know my contacts. They didn't want to know anything about me apart from what God could do for me. I think, oh, okay. What can he do for me? I had a big empty hole in me, and I couldn't fill it. When I gave my heart to God, that filled that hole. That whole stuff just went, wow. And I felt this almighty peace come over me and thought, this is good. I like this. How do I keep on at this? How do I keep this And when I start thinking about what used to be, I think, well, how good was that day that I gave my heart to God and how I felt? Father, I want that back again today. Please fill me with your Holy Spirit. Fill me with your love. Come into my heart and rule in my life. It's like a cup, isn't it? You keep drinking and drinking and drinking, or giving out and giving out and giving out, and it gets empty. And I just want him to fill me each day. I want to be on the front line. I want to be with the least and the lost. I want to be with those people, my people.
We're going to open the Word together this morning, but I wanted to show that clip because that Dave, he was a good friend of myself and Susan, and last weekend he was what we describe in the Salvation Army, promoted to glory in a motorbike accident, and we've been away during the week at Dave's funeral, and it was a guy who the place was absolutely packed. I understand there was over 600 people at his funeral, and he was a guy who wondered if he was making a difference, and there were 600 people turned up to an auditorium that held 300, so there was people everywhere in the foyer, in the overflow room. It was just an incredible time of honouring this man who lived as the light. He was someone he just lived because he just wanted to see people come to know Jesus. That's what he lived for. He wanted to see people come out of a place of addiction, out of being trapped in addiction, alcohol and drugs, and find freedom and transformation through Christ. And he lived as the light. But he didn't always live that way, as we heard, the story. He was a man who was lost in addiction. He started as a man who lived a life of, crime. He was in and out in prison, and then he found Jesus. He came to the Salvation Army to get out of doing the chores. And turns out that he, as was shared at his funeral, he came forward to the mercy seat and gave his life to Jesus. The mercy seat, for those of you who don't know, in the Salvation Army was a place where you come and kneel. And so he knelt at the front and he gave his life to Jesus. And the incredible thing with Dave is that we used to call him Big Dave. He's a big guy. And he would always sit close to where he found his salvation. So if it was over here, he knelt and came to Jesus. He would always be in the front, close to that place, and was always just hungry hungry for more of the transforming work of the Spirit of God in his life. And if there was a time, an altar call, if there was an opportunity for prayer, he was one of the first to jump up. And I used to love standing with him and praying with him, and because, it would be the same thing. What is it, Dave? I just want more. I want more of Jesus in my life. I want to know more of his transforming power in my life. Why? So that I can overflow and share him with others. I loved his picture of the cup. We need to be filled so that we can overflow and impact others. And so he was always quick for more. But the thing that I really wanted to share this morning and show that clip is that, at the end of church, what happens, we finish with a prayer, a benediction, we have our final song, and then the meeting is over. And, we've been, up until this point, we've been reasonably well behaved. We've been sitting, we've been good, we've been doing the right thing. But when we close the service, then we sort of move off, we have a cup of tea, we mix and mingle, we pack up stuff. And this was the same in Napier. We'd finish the meeting, but Dave would always just stay put. And so he would stay in his seat near the front, and he would continue to hunger after God. While people were all moving around him, he just stayed focused. He didn't want to leave that place. And so it's almost like he was getting kicked out at the end. We're locking up now, Dave. And he was just so hungry for this newfound peace that filled his life. And he wanted that, and he would just sit before God, hungering for more, focused on getting as much as he could of the Spirit of God that he discovered so that he could overflow and share him and be the light during the week. He was hungry, he was focused. I want to ask this question as we begin this morning. Think about this, if Jesus was to walk into this room right now, if somehow Jesus could come in through these doors this morning and he would walk in here and he'd come up to you, forget about everyone else in the room. If Jesus was to come to you this morning and say, what is it you want? What is it, one thing that you would want me to do for you today? What is the one thing that you're most hungry for? As my disciple, as a follower, what would you want me to do? Because that's what Jesus would do. You read about blind Bartimaeus in the Gospels, and he's blind. He comes to Jesus, and Jesus would still ask the question, what do you want me to do for you? Well, can't you see Jesus? He's blind. But he would always look, what is it that you're hungry for? What is it that you're hungry after today? If Jesus was to give you that opportunity, Dave knew what he wanted. He just wanted more of this peace and transforming power of the Spirit in his life. What would you say to Jesus? What are you hungry for today if he was to walk in and ask you that question? I want us to go to look at Elijah and Elisha for a few moments this morning. 2 Kings chapter 2, verse beginning around about verse 9. If you've got your Bibles there, the verses will come up on the screen as well. But this is a story of Elijah, who was the prophet of God. In other words, he was God's mouthpiece. He was the one that God would use to speak through to bring his heart to the nation of Israel. And incredible, God would use Elijah in incredible ways. People's lives were transformed, miracles. Situations were turned around through this man, Elijah. He wasn't doing it in his own strength. He was the light to the nation of Israel, but it was God working through him. He needed God. If it wasn't for God, he was just another person. And so God was the one that made him shine and made him stand out as his representative amongst the people of Israel. But there came a moment where Elijah was looking around for a successor, someone to take over from him when he was gone. And that's a good thing to do. In any sphere of life, succession, someone said, I think it might have been John Maxwell said, there is no success without succession. We've got to look to, that when we've moved on, that someone else has got the baton. Someone else is going to continue in this. And so Elijah found this young guy, Elisha. He got very similar names, so if I get them wrong, just bear with me. Elijah and Elisha. So Elijah was the prophet. Elisha was the young man who's been trained up to take over. So he's been groomed. He was like his apprentice, his disciple. He was being trained up to take over when he was gone. And one day, Elijah comes to Elisha and he asks him this question. He says, this very question we're thinking about. What is the one thing? What is it that if you could choose one thing, what are you most hungry for, Elisha? You know, you've hung around with me for a while now. What is it that you would, if there was one thing, what would you ask of God right now? What are you most hungry for? And this is the reply. This is what Elisha says. As he probably, he paused for a moment. He stops and reflects on the journey a little bit. You know, he's seen incredible miracles, seen God working through Elijah, seen what God can do. He knows what God is able to do. And so then he turns to Elijah and he answers the question and says, let me inherit a double portion of your spirit. In other words, man, I want to see God do even greater things. I've seen the way he's worked through you. I want that, but I want even greater. I want to see a greater level of people's lives being changed and transformed. I want to see a greater impact in the world around me. I want to shine even brighter, if possible. I want to shine my light even brighter than you've shined, Elijah. I want double the sense of the Spirit of God that is working in you and through you. Let me inherit a double portion. He knew what he was hungry for. You know, now one thing, it's not easy to narrow it down to one thing, but what is it as disciples of Jesus, what would be the one thing for you and I? Well, this is what Elisha wanted. Here's how Elijah, he says to him after he makes that response, he says, you have asked a difficult thing. You've asked a difficult thing. In other words, Elijah's saying, this is if this is going to happen, it's got to be God. There's nothing that I can do in my own strength to see this happen. If this happens, you're leaning or moving into the realm of the impossible. But I think Elisha understood that his God was a big God, and that what seems difficult in the eyes of man is an easy thing in the eyes of God. Nothing is impossible with God. Luke 1:37 says that. Nothing is impossible with God. And so when we think about the one thing, let's not think small. We're talking about a big God here. And so when we think, every one of us, there might be some things that we would want to bring before God and say, well, this is one thing. Well, remember that God is the God of the impossible. Don't think that it's too difficult for him. Whatever it is that you would want Jesus to do, remember, God is the God of the impossible. He can do great things. And so it might have been difficult in the eyes of man, but nothing is impossible with our God. So make it a big ask, as Elisha did. And so he says, you've asked a difficult thing. But then he says these interesting words as the verse continues. He says, yet if you see me when I am taken from you, it will be yours. Otherwise, it will not. Yet when you see me, or if you see me, when I'm taken from you, it will be yours, otherwise not. So what is Elijah doing there? Well, I think what's happening here is Elijah is really just wanting to gauge how hungry really is Elisha. If you really want this, Elisha, well, you gotta keep your focus. You've got to keep your focus on me. Don't take your eyes off me. Because you see, what we focus on will reveal what we're hungry for. What we focus will reveal your hunger. Hunger is the great motivator. And so it's like Elijah is just wanting to gauge how hungry is Elisha for this. And he says, if you see me, it's going to happen. If you don't, it's not. There's no middle ground. This is, you got to keep your eyes. You got to stay focused. Hunger is the great motivator. I think I might have said this before, but if you've got teenagers, if you have teenagers in the house, you'll know that there are two things that for sure that will get them to emerge from their rooms. Two things that I know for sure. Number one is you turn the Wi-Fi off. Is that right? If you turn the Wi-Fi off, then they come. The second thing is if they're hungry. If they're hungry, they'll emerge and they'll be wanting, what's for dinner? What's for dinner? Or they'll go to the fridge. Hunger is the great motivator. It is the thing that will cause us to jump in the car, drive to KFC, sit in the drive-thru for half an hour to wait for our piece of chicken. Hunger motivates. It causes it. When we're really hungry for something, we will be focused. And so Elisha had to focus. Elijah said to him, if you see me, keep focused. And so let's have a look at what happens next. It says, as they were walking along and talking together, they did a lot of this, like this was part of the grooming, was they spent a lot of time talking. This is a great picture. These two men walking along, talking together. It says, suddenly a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and separated the two of them. We pause there. So they're separated. So here's what's happened. The very moment that Elijah said, you got to stay focused. Don't take your eyes off me. And the very next moment, they're separated. They're apart from each other. And not only that, the sky is lit up with this chariots and horses of fire. If this was to happen, like I know we've got Guy Fawkes coming up, and I'm sure Mitch would love me to say, if you're getting fireworks this year, grab them off Mitch. But even Mitch's best fireworks that you can get from him, and when fireworks go off, whatever you're doing, you'll look up. If something happens up there, the fireworks, whoever you're talking to, whatever you're looking at, all of a sudden your focus will change because you're looking at that. Well, this is better than any fireworks display. Chariots of fire, horses of fire. Imagine, and that not only is Elisha separated from Elijah, now he's got all this going on in the sky. If anything was going to distract him or cause him to take his eyes off Elijah, this would, yeah? He'd be looking at all that's going on. But you might be thinking, well, hang on a minute, that's okay, because isn't that how Elijah was taken? Was it? Let's have a look. It says, let's read on. It says, and separated two of them, and Elijah went up to heaven, how? In a whirlwind. And Elisha saw this. So even in the midst of this potential distraction of all that's going on, of like the chariots and horses of fire, this going on and being separated from the two, he did not take his eyes off Elijah. Why? Because he was hungry. He was hungry to see the way that Elijah lived. He wanted that, and he wanted even greater things. So he wasn't taking his eyes off Elijah. He saw him while all this is going on in the sky, chariots of fire, horses of fire. Over here, he sees Elijah taken to heaven in a whirlwind. He saw it, and he cries out, my Father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel. It's like he's got his eyes on his father. He called him his spiritual father. This was the man who mentored him, who poured his life into him and trained him, and invested in him. So he's calling us, my Father, my Father. My eyes are on you, but I'm aware of all this that's going on. This potential, I'm not going to be distracted. My eyes are on you, my Father, my Father. The chariots and horsemen of Israel, and he did not take his eyes off Elijah. And we know the story. The story will go on is that what will happen is that Elisha would inherit that sense of double. He would go on to do double the number of miracles. He would go on to see greater things. He would go on to be a light shining, continue shining the light of God in the midst of the nation, the people, followers of God. But he had to stay focused. He had to keep his eyes on Elijah. See, there's so much in our world today that is competing for our attention. We all know this. Right now we could, I say this from time to time, we could just take a moment now and go around the whole room, and we could all share about all the things that are going on in our world, couldn't we? There are, there's just there's financial stuff, there's family, there's work, there's study, there's health stuff. There's even, some of you might even be thinking about Christmas already, I don't know. But there's all these things that sort of are trying to take our focus. And in the midst of that, how do we keep our eyes on the one thing? How do we keep our eyes on the thing that we're hungry for? Well, we've got to know what that is first. What are we hungry for in God? I love the story of Dave. The more I think about him, I'm inspired by his hunger, just to continually be filled with the peace and presence of God's Spirit. Be that cup that overflows. Don't let the cup become empty. And remember, it's not about you. We want to be filled for the sake of those that we're around. And he wanted to be filled to overflowing. So he was continuing in that place, hungry, nothing. He would sit in the chair. He would be in his chair, which I've got one here. I'll bring it up. This is Dave. This is Dave on a Sunday morning when everyone else is moving around him. He's in his chair. Someone might have got him a cup of tea, but he's got his cup of tea. He's sitting in his chair and he is just hungering after God. So thankful for what God's done for him. Set him free from so much, and now he just wants others. He just recently started a recovery church in Napier. And, it was growing, it was building. Him and his wife, Sue, had started this and seeing many, many people, many lives, people who were just had lost their way in life, coming out of that place, coming to this recovery church on a Sunday night at the Napier Salvation Army. Why? Because one man was so hungry for God to fill him and use him. And so I asked you the question this morning, if Jesus was to come, just as we look to finish today, what would the one thing be? What would the one thing be for you? Elisha knew exactly what it was. He was clear. It was clear in his mind, But for you and I, what is it? And sometimes in our world, we have so much, don't we? What do we need? For others, it's like there's so much going on. How do I narrow it down to one thing? But if there's one thing for you this morning, if Jesus was to come to you, say, what would you want me to do for you today, this day? Not something that the world can offer. This is not something that money can buy. This is something that only God can do. Maybe even this morning you're sitting here in this room and you're not even sure about, you've heard about Jamie who came into this relationship with Jesus. We've heard about Dave who came along and he found this incredible life-changing relationship with Jesus, and you're not even sure you've got that relationship. Well, that's a good one thing to ask this morning. God, I want to know you. I want to know you. I want to know this love. I want to know this peace. I want to know this freedom. Well, he's here this morning. Maybe some of you are feeling like, man, I've lost that fire. I'm not really hungry. When I think about God, I'm not really hungry after the things of God. I need God to come and stir me. Come and give me a kick up the backside this morning. Come and refresh, stir a hunger for Him today. Maybe that's your one thing. You're just going through the motions. Church is a bit like, well, tick the box, I did that. That's not what life as a disciple is about. We come here like Dave, we come here to get filled to overflowing. So we go out there into the mission field and we overflow and we impact through our words and actions. We have conversations at the photocopy machine. We in the supermarket, wherever we find ourselves, that moment of interruption, we're ready. We're filled to overflowing. Maybe your thing is you're hungry to be filled afresh this morning.
that is who you are. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are.
So I am Sharon, and I am going to share just a few examples this morning about how I be the light, or live out my faith, or as I like to call it, be a social influencer for God, just in my everyday life and what that looks like. I'm actually preaching here in a few weeks' time, and during that time I'm going to share another story about how I work out my faith in a somewhat different environment. So if you want to know what that is, you'll have to come back. It's a wee teaser for you. But this morning, there's a verse from the Bible from 1 Peter 3:15 that will go up behind me, and it says, "If anyone asks you about the hope living within you, always be ready to explain your faith with gentleness and respect." So that's a verse that I carry in my DNA. It's part of who I am. I'm conscious of this verse all the time, and I try and work this out when the opportunity arises. So I laughed a few weeks ago when Robert was preaching, not at You'll Be the Light jokes, Robert, sorry, not about that. But I laughed because Robert was talking about interruptions that happen in our day, or just things that come along that you hadn't planned for, people that just come along your path. You hadn't planned on that, but what what Robert was saying, God through Robert was saying, that is a God, not a coincidence, a God moment. And I'd like to also agree with that and call that a divine God appointment. And so when they happen, most recently for me on a couple of occasions, it's happened in my local supermarket. I seem to spend a lot of my time at the local supermarket. And so just going in there for a quick trip on two separate occasions, I bumped into mums that I knew just through stuff and community, and started having a conversation with these women. I think it was in the Weet-Bix aisle, and very quickly you hear that things aren't okay at home, life is tough for them. And so on these two separate occasions, we stood there for about half an hour, 45 minutes, just talking, more so listening for me to these women and things that were going on for them. And so I'm really conscious that at the end of that conversation, anybody can be nice and listen and be a friend and empathise, but what is it that I have that is different to anybody else? And so for me, it's this hope. I have a faith, and I believe in God that He's got a plan. And so what I said to these women was, look, I've listened to what you've said today, and that's really tough what you're going through. So for me, I'm a mum as well, and I get it, and every day I am praying and asking God, because I believe in God, to guide me as a parent, to give me wisdom, and I'm also praying for my children every day. I pray for protection over them. I pray that God will give them wisdom to make good decisions. And I said, so would you mind, over these next few weeks, when your children or you come to mind about what you've shared, are you okay if I just be praying for you and asking the God that I believe in to help you in these situations? And both of them got quite teary and said, of course, that would be awesome. They are solo mums, raising teenagers, and it's tough. And so it wasn't a big preach, it was just, in that moment, opportunity to share what the faith and the hope that I have, which is hopefully something more than just other people have. Confession though, sometimes I do need to get to the supermarket and be out in 5 minutes, so I'll grab one of the kids and say, right, I'll drive, you're going in to buy the groceries, because all due respect, God, I don't have time for any God divine appointments today. I'm just keeping it real, just being real with you. The other two stories are work related. So some of you will know I used to be a police officer. I'm not now, but I still work within the police. And in 2017, I started a contract with the Child Protection Team. And when you're starting in a new environment, there was about 25, 30 officers that work there. So I'm getting to know them, they're getting to know me. For me, Mondays is always an easy day to witness, because people always ask, how was your weekend? What did you get up to? So for me, it's always taxi driver on Saturday for my children, and Sunday we always go to church as a family. And so that will often start a conversation. Oh, you go to church, where do you go? And off we go. So very quickly I got known as Sharon the Church or Sally Girl, and that's fine. Sometimes people then would go on, as they get to know you over the months and time that you're at this job. How was church on Sunday? Good. Sometimes I'd share little bits about what had happened or what we'd talked about, and that would lead to conversations. sometimes that would stop them dead in their tracks, and they'd suddenly remember a phone call that they had to go and make. But that's okay. I sow my seeds. So at Child Protection, we had a new young man that started, well, they're all young these days, but anyway, this new guy transferred in to Wellington. He was new, so starting to get to know him, and we would have these conversations in my office, and very quickly got to understand he was a really intelligent young man, hungry for knowledge. He had read books on theology, philosophy, all the different religions, really well read, and sometimes our conversations, things he would say were probably a bit over my head, but he was great. We loved having conversations together. One day he said to me, "Oh, Sharon, look, I know you're a Christian. Do you believe in lots of gods, or do you believe that creation is God, or do you believe in a God?" And I said, "Well, I'd like to think I believe in the God who created this earth that we live in." So we had a bit of a conversation about that, and I said to him, "Look, would you like, I could bring one of my Bibles in and show you some stuff." And he said, "Oh, no, I've already read the Bible from cover to cover, and I read it in the King James Version." So, of course you did, silly me. So anyway, over time, one day I was standing by the photocopier, and this guy came up to me and he said, "Sharon, I've been watching you. And you must have seen something in my face." And he said, "Oh, no, not like that. I know you're married. I know you're married to a cop, and I know he carries a gun, so no, not like that. It's okay." But he said, "But I've been watching you around the office, and you're different. You're different to the other people around here." He said, "I know you've been a cop, and I know you've dealt with some awful things. You work here at Child Protection, where we deal with horrendous stories." He said, "But you always come to work, you're positive, and you're happy. But more than that, there's a peace about you. There's something different, and you carry this peace, and I want to know what it is." And I said to him, "Well, look, I've said I believe in God, but it's more than that. I have a relationship with God. And so every day I'm asking for his guidance. I have a peace because I know that he is in control of my life, that I have a hope with him, and I'm really at peace because each day I'm just living in this knowledge that I'm secure in this relationship with God who created the earth." And I said, "So I'm believing that what you're seeing is in me is God's Holy Spirit that comes out, and that's his spirit, it's not me." And so he looked at me for a bit. He's a processor, standing there looking. He said, "No, that's not it, Sharon. That can't be it. There's got to be something else." I said, "Well, that's all I got." I said, "It's not special vitamins. We drink the same coffee. Cannabis ain't legal yet, just saying." But I felt quite sad for him actually, because he couldn't comprehend that the difference that he saw in me was God. He wanted to find it in a book, or there had to be something else. But anyway, I sowed my seeds with him. We kept having good conversations. I invited him here to SAJ on 2 occasions. But as I said, he's a young man, and I found out that Saturday night is Tinder date night, and then so Sunday is recovery day from Tinder date night. So Tinder date, recovery, or coming to church with Sharon, not so much yet. But look, I'm still praying for him and believing God will do a work in his life. The last story I want to tell you, the other contract that I work is at Police College, and I've been there since 2013. Again, people get to know you, you have conversations with them, and on 2016, one of the recruiting sergeants asked me into his office at the end of the day, and his name is Sergeant Jamie Bradley, and some of you will know exactly who I'm talking about. So Jamie asked me into his office, and he said, "Sharon, I've been getting to know you, and I've watched how you speak with people. I watch when you walk away from conversations that are heading down a path you might not want to be involved in. And you're a Christian, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah, Jamie, I am." And he said, "Do you pray for people?" I said, yeah, I do." And he said, "Do you pray for people and lay hands on them for healing?" I said, "Yes, Jamie, I do." And he said, "Would you pray for me?" I said, "Oh, of course." So Jamie was taken to church by his parents when he was little. He left church when he was late teens, about 20. Church wasn't part of his makeup anymore. However, come 2016, he's now a 50-year-old man with a wife and a teenage daughter, and he's been diagnosed with a melanoma under his eye. So long story short, we start a really nice relationship, Jamie and I, lots of conversations about God and my faith, and every time he was going in for a procedure or tests on the melanoma, we would pray with him, myself and another Christian officer that was at work. So he was asking lots of questions, and so one day I said to him, Jamie, would you like to come to my church here at SAJ? And it took him a wee while to think about that, but he said one day, yep, I'll come along. He was really nervous about coming, but he came along with his wife and his daughter, and I felt very welcome. So thank you all for welcoming Jamie. So Jamie started attending here quite regularly, which was awesome. And ultimately, again, long story short, he asked Jesus into his heart and began a relationship with Jesus, which was just amazing and beautiful to see. And so our conversations at college spent less time talking about police work than God, and we'd have big discussions about what Robert had preached about and stuff. It was great. What was not great was that at the end of 2016, just before Christmas, doctors still doing tests on Jamie found a tumour in his brain and on his lungs, and it was inoperable. So we were obviously praying for Jamie to be healed, and there was a number of people here praying for Jamie to be healed as well. At the beginning of 2017, Jamie was interviewed for the War Cry, this War Cry here, and he shared his testimony. It was published in March 2017. A couple of sentences at the end of his testimony, Jamie says this. He says, obviously healing would be fantastic, and people are praying for this. But if I die from this brain tumour, I wouldn't say that God has let me down, and I wouldn't want anyone else to say that. Because if this hadn't have happened to me, I wouldn't be where I am now. And if this didn't happen in the way that it has, I would have missed out on having a relationship with God. That's how I see it. 4 months later, after that was published, Jamie did die, and he went home to heaven, where I know he and God are having amazing conversations. On one hand, the grief and the loss, you see it's still raw. For us as his friends is huge, for his wife and his daughter is sometimes overwhelming. On the other hand, a few days before Jamie died, his brother rang me from Te Amanga Hospice in the hut where he was being cared for in palliative care. And he said, look, Jamie wants you, Sharon, to speak at his funeral. He's got family speaking, he's got police colleagues speaking, but he wants you to speak about his faith, about his church family, how he became a Christian. But he said, but you've got to be careful. I don't want it to be too preachy, because there's going to be lots of hardened cops at his funeral. So be careful with what you say. No pressure. Oh, thank you, Jamie. So his funeral was held at Police College in the large gymnasium there where all the police graduations take place. It was packed with friends and family, but it was a sea of blue uniforms. Jamie had been teaching recruits for years and years at the Police College, and he was held in really high regard. So many of those graduated officers came back, constables from all around the country came, police that he had worked with in his years as a police officer, and also current recruits that he had been teaching. Robert did an amazing job of leading Jamie's funeral. Some of our worship team came and sang and played Amazing Grace, which was one of Jamie's really special songs. And Jamie had written out in detail his journey about his illness and about how his faith had grown in that and how he had found Jesus. And so I was able to use a lot of Jamie's words in what I shared at his funeral. And I finished by reading what Jamie had said in his interview in the War Cry, that if this hadn't have happened, I would have missed out on a relationship with God. And in those few moments, Jamie, while not physically present, his faith, his light, his hope and truth could not have shone any brighter in that moment or been any clearer to the hundreds and hundreds of people and police officers that were in attendance. That even in his death, his faith could not be silent. His hope was heard so loudly and powerfully. And in that moment, you could feel tangibly, like you can now when we were singing today, the Holy Spirit tangibly in that police gymnasium. So I shared my hope and faith with Jamie. And he found this hope in having a relationship with Jesus, and in turn, he was able to share and witness and sow hundreds and hundreds of seeds for God at his funeral, which I know God is still growing, because officers still come and talk to me and say, Sharon, I'm still thinking about what you said. I'm still thinking about what Jamie said at his funeral. His light still shines in his death. So if anyone asks me about the hope living within me, I am always ready to explain my faith, but I must do this with gentleness and respect. And that's how I live out my faith, or be the light, or be a social influencer for God. Thank you.
Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one.